We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back, and we're here with Delegate Marcus Simon, representing Falls Church. And so you were comparing this legislative session with your first one, and how would you say, I mean, it's different obviously because of the length, but how do you feel more comfort and ease, and are you going to introduce some exciting bills next year?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah. So there's a unspoken rule, right, that freshmen are sort of there to be seen and not heard. And so my first term, really, my first session in particular, you try to sit back and listen, see how things work, get the rhythm of the place, learn the procedure. And I always reminded myself, the General Assembly's been around since 1619, and somehow it's managed to survive almost 400 years without me. So what's another session, right? I could wait to be heard. But now that I'm sort of my second session, I started to talk a little bit more. Now that I'm into my third session, my second term, I really did get comfortable speaking out. And in fact, we had a lot of turnover. We had 8 new members of the Democratic caucus. So we only have 34 members. Almost a third of our caucus was brand new. So some of us had to sort of step up and take on a bigger role right away. And so I was happy to be one of those folks. I got to be the person to speak out against a lot of the aggressive bills that they had to try and put guns everywhere in Virginia, to give more guns to more people in more places, and I stood up to some of that. Also, there's a big debate this year as a pushback to same-sex marriage now being the law of the land. The response on the right was to try and put together some of these what they call religious freedom bills, which aren't really about religious freedom, but they're about allowing people to discriminate now against same-sex couples without any kind of repercussions. And so I was sort of our caucus point person on that issue, and I debated that on the floor and tried to point out that what this really is, it's not about freedom. We actually had this come up just one of the last days of session, so it's fresh in my mind. Anybody, the bill in particular said that you couldn't require anyone to perform a same-sex marriage if they didn't want to. And our point was that's already the law. No clergy person, I should say, has to marry anybody that they don't want to.
Right, so they shouldn't be worried about losing their 501c3 status or anything like that.
Right, and it's never been the case. It's sort of a ruse, but what they did is they took that sort of as the nugget. No, you shouldn't be required to marry anybody you don't want to, which we all agree with, and then went beyond that and said, and you should be able to deny people scholarships based on being married. You should be able to deny admission to colleges. You should be able to deny them benefits. So if you're a 501c3 providing charitable stuff, you've got to be able to, I think you ought to be able to provide that charity to everyone. And not say, no, if you're part of a same-sex couple, you can't participate in what we do.
Right, but as a private entity, the church has a choice to marry whoever they want, and then they won't have repercussions like that. They won't take away their license.
Right, and that's always been the case, and that will remain the case.
That's so. And so you have to. I think a lot of your job is educating folks and debunking the scary rumors, and in that sense.
Well, I mean, one of the things that you see that folks do is they try and create the straw man, right? They create this awful possibility, hey, all these terrible things might happen if we don't act. And a lot of it's saying, no, that's not true. Nobody's talking about doing any of those things.
Yeah.
So that's not really a problem that needs to be solved yet.
Yeah. So it's not like the case of the people getting sued because they didn't make a cake for someone. It's not like that. So.
Exactly. It doesn't happen. That couldn't happen in Virginia under existing law. There's no danger of anything like that happening. So these are sort of overreach. But really what it really boiled down to is the real problem I had is you were taking one particular religious belief, right, which is that marriage should be between one man and one woman. And if that's your religious belief, fine. I'm not going to try and tell you to believe something different. But giving that one particular religious belief special legal protection, special status, is problematic for me because the state doesn't give preference to specific sets of beliefs over others. That would be an establishment of essentially a state religion. That's what I argued. Now, ultimately, the legislation passed narrowly in the House, but the governor's going to veto it. We've got more than enough votes to sustain a veto of that legislation.
So, and that's what makes your schedule a little crazy. When do you expect to come back for the veto session?
So April 20th is the veto session.
Okay.
And that'll be where the real fun happens. We actually have in the House now 34 Democrats, which is one more than we need. It's exactly what we need to sustain a veto. So as long as nobody gets sick, nobody has a work conflict, and everybody's there, we should have enough if everybody holds to sustain all of the governor's vetoes. He's promised us about 25 or 30 or so vetoes. It'll be a pretty active session when we get back. And if we all hold together, we should be successful.
So the process is he might veto something and then both houses have to vote on it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'll tell you one of my favorite moments from this last session. There was a bill on Common Core. All right, this is another one of these straw man type arguments. There's a bill to say that Virginia can never, ever, ever, ever adopt Common Core. Well, Virginia doesn't use Common Core now. We use the standards of learning. We've issued a statement, our Board of Education, saying we don't believe the Common Core is right for Virginia. We're not going to do it.
Right. It's already there.
But they wanted to put a law in that says that if they ever tried, the General Assembly would have to approve it first. And the governor vetoed it and said, you guys are just taking a swipe at the president. This isn't really about policy. This is just about partisan politics. There's no danger of anybody doing Common Core. But we had maybe 5 or 6 Democrats vote for the bill when it first came through because, what's the harm? It doesn't really change anything anyway. But when it came time to back the governor in his veto of the legislation, things changed. And so the Republicans didn't know what to do. What happened was they said, shall the governor's veto be overridden? And all 34 buttons went red to block the override of the veto, and they were stunned. They sort of looked at each other. It hadn't happened in so long because we picked up a seat this session, and they didn't know what to do next. And they asked if they could reverse the vote, and it was a little bit of chaos on their side. So we don't, with only 34 out of 100, you don't get a lot of wins, but when you do, you can take some time to savor them and enjoy it.
Wow, that's amazing. And then proffers is another topic, another bill that it wasn't split on partisan issues. It was split mostly demographics, or did you feel like it was city versus not city, or by the metro versus not by the metro?
Well, it was an interesting one. It was a regional issue, certainly. It was nonpartisan. So the proffer bill, for those watching, it would limit what localities could require of developers when they wanted to add density, essentially, to whatever was existing. So if somebody wants to come in and do a new development that's denser than what's already in the zoning, typically they'll offer that's what we call a proffer. They'll offer to say, look, in exchange for this greater density, we'll build some roads, we'll add some schools, we'll do some things to since we're going to add this pressure to the locality, we'll pay for some of the amenities that need to go with it. Some localities had gone to a system of what they call cash proffers. They said, listen, don't give us the road and give us the school, just give us the money, and we'll decide how to spend it. And then they weren't spending it. Also, there was something called design proffers that some localities were using, particularly in Chesterfield County, where they wanted to make sure that the development was of high quality. And to control the quality, they were literally telling the builders what kind of countertops they should have, what kind of fixtures they should have, brushed nickel or brass, and all these sorts of things. And the builders sort of said, look, enough's enough. This has gone out of control. It's gone from a place where you help us out a little bit to you're telling us exactly what we have to do in order to get it. It becomes a tax, essentially, on it. I voted initially against the bill that would have limited the locality's ability to issue proffers the first time it came up in the House. I eventually voted for the final bill because we asked for a number of improvements to the bill. And so we got exceptions. So for instance, anything that's close to a metro station is exempt. You can still have the same existing proffer process. If you've got a small area plan, so someplace like the Mosaic District, near where we are right now, that's part of an existing small area comprehensive plan. That's exempted from the bill, meaning that the existing proffer system is still there. So for my locality and my district, when I went back and asked for a series of amendments, and the proponents of the bill said yes, I couldn't, after that, have them say yes to all my amendments, still vote against their bill. Otherwise, you'd begin to lose credibility. There were some folks that, Loudoun County, for instance, which was really one of the targeted communities, where it wouldn't matter what they were going to do to the bill, it wasn't going to work for Loudoun, and so those delegates voted against it. Some Fairfax delegates voted, continued to vote against it. I represent the city of Falls Church as well as Fairfax, and most of my area, again, got what we wanted out of it. So as much as I felt some solidarity with some of the fellow folks, but you can't be down there and bargain in bad faith. If you're going to make a bargain and you're going to say, I want these things changed, then ultimately when you get what you want, you need to vote the right way. Otherwise, they won't offer you any concessions again the next time.
Yeah, and so when you have a bill like that, how do you poll the people that in your district, or how do you figure out where to stand on that bill?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I do a candidate survey, and we do ask some questions generally, but I kind of think it's my job to know how my constituents feel about something like this, and then to be able to explain to them, you know, why, look, I understand what you guys value and what's important to you, and here's the way I voted the way I did.
Yeah.
And to be able to, you can't necessarily poll them on every issue. There's not going to be time for that. But again, my job is to be such a, you know, that's why I attend civic association meetings all the time. It's why I go to town halls. It's why I really become an active member of my community. So when something comes up, I'm like, I know how my constituents are going to feel about this issue.
Yeah, yeah. And when the last time I was down there, how many thousands of bills are introduced in a 2-month session?
So, you know, typically it's over the 2-year, the biennial process is about 3,000 bills. I think we were a little ahead of schedule. I think we had about 1,800 or so this session, not counting joint resolutions and commending resolutions and things like that. So it's a lot that comes at you very quickly. And you've got to be able to also trust your colleagues. You know, we talked about Jen McClellan earlier from Richmond, who carried the bill on underage marriage. You know, I know how she feels about a lot of issues, and she's a real expert on this. And so when I saw that she was a sponsor, that made it easy for me. I could sit back a little bit. I didn't have to become an expert too.
Trusted her judgment.
I could trust her judgment on it.
And then one of the probably last question, we have about a minute and a half left, is why did you vote against the budget? I don't know if that's a long or short answer.
There's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is I voted against the budget because it didn't have Medicaid expansion in it. We have 400,000 Virginians that would benefit from expanding Medicaid, that would have health care coverage, that don't have it now if we expanded Medicaid. The governor's budget that he introduced included Medicaid expansion. So it's costing us $3 billion over the next 2 years in federal money that we're not going to receive. That's about $6 million a day for Medicaid expansion. In addition to that, it's costing us about $250 to $300 million out of the general fund on services we're going to have to spend on things that would have been covered by Medicaid expansion. For example, real quick, prisoner health care. We're paying for prisoners who would qualify for Medicaid under Medicaid expansion, we're paying for 100% of their health care with our state funds. That's money that's not going to programs to improve mental health in prisons. It's not going to rehabilitation. It's not going to prevent recidivism. All these things that were in the budget that got taken out so that we could fund basic medical care. And it says right there in the budget, these are savings that are a result of not expanding Medicaid. So, you know, I have the luxury of being one of 100 and being a part of a minority party. I felt that my vote was more valuable as a statement and as a protest against what was happening. I knew there were enough votes to pass the budget.
Wow, well, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Great
and
to be here.
We're going to talk a little bit maybe next month or as soon as when you're done with that veto session.
Happy to, anytime.
Thanks for stopping by.